I thought his ex was unstable because that's what he kept saying. He told me she made problems out of nothing. I believed him. Until I started doing the same things she did. Questioning him. Doubting myself. Feeling like I was losing control. And when I finally called him out, he just smiled and said, "See? You're doing it again." The truth was, I didn't know anymore if the problem was him or me. When I met Mark Rodriguez, nothing about it felt dramatic. It was just a normal afternoon in Denver. I had stopped by a coffee shop after work, the kind of place that's always a little too crowded but still somehow quiet. He was sitting alone at a small table, laptop open, completely focused. I asked if I could sit there because there were no other spots. He didn't hesitate. He closed his laptop right away and said, "Yeah, of course." That was the first thing I noticed about him. He didn't make you feel like an interruption. He made you feel like you mattered immediately. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. Nothing deep. Work, traffic, how expensive everything had gotten lately. But it felt easy. Natural. Like I didn't have to perform or prove anything. He asked for my number before I left, and I gave it to him without thinking too much about it. At the time, I told myself it was just because he seemed nice. Looking back, I think it was because he felt calm. And I was tired of everything that wasn't. A week later, we had dinner. Then another. Then it just became routine. Mark was consistent. He texted when he said he would. He showed up when he planned to. He didn't overwhelm me with attention, but he didn't disappear either. It felt balanced in a way I hadn't experienced before. Somewhere in those first few weeks, he mentioned his ex. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't a long story. Just a few comments here and there. She was kind of unstable, he said once, like he was just stating a fact. She'd turn small things into big problems. Another time, when we passed a couple arguing outside a restaurant, he glanced at them and said, "That's exactly what it was like. Constant drama." I remember asking, "What do you mean?" He shrugged. She overthought everything. Always assumed the worst. I tried to be patient, but it didn't matter. He said it so calmly. No anger. No bitterness. Just certainty. And I believed him. Not just because of what he said, but because of how different he seemed. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't react emotionally. If anything, he seemed almost too controlled. At the time, I thought that meant maturity. The first few months felt easy. Almost too easy, but in a way that felt like a good thing. We didn't fight. Not even once. If something came up that could turn into an argument, Mark had a way of smoothing it over before it got there. One night, he showed up late to dinner. Almost 40 minutes. I had been sitting there the whole time, checking my phone, getting more annoyed the longer I waited. When he finally walked in, he looked completely relaxed. Like nothing was wrong. I didn't smile when he sat down. "You're late," I said. He looked at me for a second, then smiled slightly. "Traffic was bad." "It's always bad," I said. "You could have left earlier." He leaned back in his chair, still calm. "I mean, I'm here now. Do we really want to start the night like this?" It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like I was the one making a choice to ruin something. I hesitated, just for a second. And in that second, the frustration I felt started to fade into something else. Doubt. "I'm not trying to start anything," I said. "I just don't like waiting that long without knowing what's going on." "I get that," he said, nodding. "But it's not a big deal. Things happen." And that was it. No apology. No acknowledgement that maybe he could have handled it differently. Just a quiet shift where the situation stopped being about what he did and became about how I reacted. I let it go. At the time, it felt like the mature thing to do. That pattern kept repeating. Not in obvious ways. Nothing dramatic enough to stand out. Just small moments that didn't sit right, but also didn't feel big enough to push. If I got annoyed about something, he would downplay it. "If it bothered you, you can just say that," he'd tell me. "But don't turn it into something bigger than it is." If I tried to explain why something mattered to me, he'd listen, but his response would always bring it back to perspective. "You're focusing on the wrong part," he'd say. "You're making yourself upset over something minor." It never sounded like an attack. If anything, it sounded reasonable. And that made it harder to question. After a while, I started adjusting without realizing it. I'd think about what I wanted to say before I said it. I'd soften my words. Rephrase things in a way that sounded less emotional, more logical. Because every time I didn't, the outcome was the same. I was the one who needed to calm down. I was the one who was overthinking. I was the one making something out of nothing. There was one moment that stayed with me more than the others. We were sitting in his apartment, just talking about random plans for the weekend. At some point, he mentioned maybe going out of town for a day. Nothing specific, just the idea of it. A few days later, I brought it up again. "Do you still want to do that day trip you mentioned?" I asked. He looked at me like I had said something confusing. "What day trip?" "The one you mentioned the other night," I said. "You said it might be nice to get out of the city for a bit." He shook his head slightly. "I never said that." I paused. "You did," I said. "We were sitting right here." He smiled, but not in a warm way. More like he was trying to be patient. No, that was you, he said. You said you wanted to get out of the city. I just agreed it could be nice. I felt my chest tighten a little. I'm pretty sure you brought it up first, I said. He let out a small breath. Lisa, why does it matter who said it? It matters because I remember it, I said. He looked at me for a second, then leaned back slightly. Okay, he said. But that doesn't mean you're remembering it correctly. That was the first time something felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore. Not because of the disagreement itself, but because of how easily he dismissed what I was saying. Like my version of things didn't carry the same weight as his. I didn't argue after that. I just said, maybe I mixed it up and changed the subject. But I didn't feel settled. I felt unsure. And that feeling didn't go away. It just stayed there, quiet, waiting for the next time something didn't line up. That feeling didn't go away. It followed me into everything after that. Not in a loud way. Not like anxiety or panic. Just this quiet hesitation every time I was about to say something. Like I had to double-check myself first. At some point, I stopped reacting in the moment. Instead, I started thinking ahead. Replaying conversations in my head before they even happened, trying to make sure I said things the right way. Less emotional. More reasonable. Because every time I didn't, it ended the same way. With me backing down. There was a night at my apartment that made it worse. I had cooked dinner. Nothing special, just something simple after work. He came over later than he said he would, again, but I didn't mention it this time. I told myself it wasn't worth turning into something. We were eating, talking about random things when I brought up something small. I don't even remember exactly what it was anymore, just that it bothered me. I feel like you've been canceling plans last minute a lot, I said. I kept my tone calm, careful. He didn't react right away. Just kept eating, like he was thinking about how to respond. Then he looked up. That's not really true, he said. It is, I said quietly. It's happened a few times this week. He shook his head slightly. You're exaggerating. I felt that same tight feeling in my chest. I'm not trying to exaggerate, I said. I'm just telling you how it feels. He put his fork down and leaned back. Okay, but that's different, he said. You're talking about how it feels, not what actually happened. I paused. I mean, it did happen, I said. Not the way you're describing it, he replied. Still calm. Still controlled. And suddenly I felt like I was losing the point. Like I had to defend not just what I felt, but whether it was even valid to feel it. I just don't like when plans change last minute, I said, trying to simplify it. He nodded slowly, like he was explaining something obvious. Then don't make it into something bigger than it is, he said. Things come up. It's normal. I stared at him for a second. I'm not making it bigger, I said. I'm just saying it bothers me. And I'm saying it doesn't need to, he replied. That was it. That quiet shift again. From me expressing something, to me being the problem for expressing it. I didn't push it after that. I just said, okay, and dropped it. But inside, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just that he disagreed. It was that there was no space for me to be right. That pattern kept building. Small moments. Small corrections. Small ways of turning things around just enough that I couldn't quite argue with them, but also couldn't fully accept them. And over time, I started changing. I became more careful with my words. More hesitant. More quiet. Ashley noticed it before I did. We were sitting in her apartment one night, just talking like we usually did. She was on the couch, still in her scrubs from work, half paying attention to the TV. You've been different lately, she said suddenly. I laughed a little. Different how? She muted the TV and looked at me. Quieter, she said. Like you're holding back. I'm just tired, I said. She didn't respond right away. Just watched me for a second longer than felt comfortable. Is everything okay with Mark? She asked. Yeah, I said quickly. Everything's fine. That word again. Fine. She leaned back slightly, but didn't look convinced. Ashley, I said, trying to sound normal, it's really fine. We don't fight. It's actually easy. She nodded slowly. That's what worries me, she said. I frowned. Why? Because you sound like you're trying to convince yourself, she said. I felt defensive immediately. I'm not, I said. He's just not dramatic like other people. He's calm. Ashley gave a small, almost tired smile. My ex was calm too, she said. Something about the way she said it made me pause. What do you mean? I asked. She shrugged. Same kind of thing. Never raised his voice. Always reasonable. But somehow every argument ended with me apologizing. I shook my head slightly. That's not what this is. She didn't argue with me. She just nodded again, like she expected that answer. Okay, she said. Just pay attention to how you feel. Not just what he says. I brushed it off at the time. I told myself she was projecting. But her words stayed with me. Pay attention to how you feel. I started noticing things more after that. Not confronting them. Just noticing. Like how often I apologized. Not because I clearly did something wrong, but because it felt easier than explaining myself. Or how I would replay conversations in my head later, trying to figure out where things shifted. Trying to understand how something small turned into me feeling like I messed up. There was one moment at work that made everything harder to ignore. I was in a meeting with my manager, David Brown, going over a customer issue I had handled earlier that week. He asked me a simple question about the timeline, and I froze. Not completely, I answered, but there was a hesitation. Like I needed to double-check my own memory before I spoke. David noticed. "You're not sure?" he asked. "No, I am," I said quickly. "I just wanted to make sure I explained it right." He nodded, but I could tell he saw it. That small moment of doubt. And that bothered me more than anything else. Because I used to be sure. I used to trust what I knew, what I remembered, what I felt. And now I didn't. Later that night, I was sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through old messages between me and Mark. Not for any real reason. Just checking. Looking for proof that I wasn't imagining things. Sometimes I found it. Small things. Messages that confirmed what I remembered. Other times, I didn't. And those were the worst moments. Because that's when the doubt came back stronger. Maybe he's right. Maybe I'm remembering things wrong. Maybe I'm the one making things complicated. I stared at my phone for a long time that night. Then I put it down and just sat there in silence. And for the first time, I asked myself something I hadn't wanted to ask before. When did I start feeling like this? Not just unsure, but small. Like everything I thought or felt needed to be checked, corrected, or softened before it was acceptable. I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing for sure. It hadn't always been like this. And that thought stayed with me longer than anything else. That thought didn't leave me alone after that. It followed me into everything, like a quiet voice I couldn't turn off. It wasn't loud. It didn't accuse him directly. It just kept asking the same question in different ways. Why do you feel smaller now? I started noticing patterns more clearly after that. Not just moments, but how they connected. Every time something didn't feel right, it followed the same path. I'd bring it up carefully. He'd respond calmly. And somehow, by the end of the conversation, I'd be the one apologizing. Not always out loud. Sometimes just internally. Like I had done something wrong by even bringing it up. The turning point came from something small again. It always did. We were sitting in his apartment one evening, talking about maybe getting out of the city for the weekend. Nothing planned, just ideas. At one point, he said, it might be nice to drive up into the mountains. Just for a day or two. I remember it clearly because I actually felt excited. It sounded like something we needed. A few days later, I brought it up again. Do you still want to do that cabin trip this weekend? I asked. He looked at me confused. What cabin trip? I paused. The one you mentioned. Going up into the mountains. He shook his head slightly. I never said anything about a cabin. My stomach dropped a little. You did, I said. We were sitting on your couch. You said it would be nice to get out of the city. He gave that same small smile. The one that felt patient, but not warm. No, he said. That was you. You said you needed a break. I just agreed. I felt my chest tighten. I remember it, I said, quieter now. He leaned back, like he'd already decided how this was going to go. Lisa, he said, calm as always, you've been mixing things up a lot lately. Something about the way he said it hit harder than anything else. Not defensive. Not angry. Just certain. Like this wasn't a disagreement. It was a correction. I'm not mixing it up, I said. He sighed, like I was making things difficult. Why are you so set on arguing about this? He asked. That was the moment everything shifted. Because I wasn't arguing. I was trying to hold on to something I knew was real. And suddenly, I realized he wasn't even considering that he might be wrong. Not even for a second. I stopped talking. Not because I agreed with him, but because I felt something break. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet. Like something inside me finally gave up trying to be heard. I nodded slightly and said, maybe I got it wrong. And he smiled. Okay, he said. That makes more sense. That moment stayed with me longer than anything else. Not because of what he said, but because of how easy it was for him to accept that I was wrong. Like that was always the natural outcome. Later that night, I went home and sat on my couch without turning on the lights. I just sat there, replaying everything. Not just that conversation. All of them. The way things always shifted. The way I always ended up questioning myself. The way he never once said, maybe I'm wrong. Not once. And then I thought about his ex. Emma White. The one he called unstable. The one who made problems out of nothing. And for the first time, I didn't picture her as dramatic or unreasonable. I pictured her sitting across from him, trying to explain something that mattered to her. And being told, calmly, that she was wrong. Over and over again. Until she started reacting emotionally. Until she started pushing harder. Until she looked like the problem. That realization hit me all at once. I wasn't becoming her. I was being put in the same position she had been in. And suddenly, everything made sense. Not in a comforting way. In a terrifying one. Because it meant this wasn't random. It was a pattern. And I was in it. I didn't confront him that night. I didn't text him. I didn't do anything. I just sat there and asked myself one question. When was the last time I trusted my own memory without needing proof? I couldn't answer it. And that scared me more than anything else. The next few days, I didn't change how I acted around him. Not obviously. I didn't pick fights. I didn't call him out. I just paid attention to what he said, to how he responded, to how I felt during and after every conversation. And once I started looking for it, I couldn't unsee it. The way he slightly adjusted details. The way he stayed calm while I got frustrated, and then used that difference to prove a point. The way every issue somehow circled back to me being the one who misunderstood, overreacted, or remembered things wrong. It wasn't obvious manipulation. It was subtle, consistent, quiet, and that made it worse. Because it was easy to doubt, easy to question, easy to explain away. But once I saw it, I couldn't go back to not seeing it. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was wrong, and started asking something else. What if I'm not?